Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the start of our session. My name is Kevin Riney, and I am an assistant professor of geography at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I have the privilege to moderate today's session. So greetings to all of our AGS viewers. The title of this session is Climate Change and Global Justice, which is quite timely given the recent release of the first installment of the IPCC AR6, the Sixth Assessment Report, and the upcoming staging of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland, also known as COP26. I think most persons would agree with me that climate change presents the single largest threat to human societies in the 21st century. And what is clear is that the effects of climate change mount, as the effects of climate change mount, so does the urgency to ensure equity while pursuing solutions. Inadequate action will mean more lives lost, worsening inequality, mass migration and displacement, and major economic disruptions. The main purpose of this roundtable is to discuss the geographic dimensions that produce uneven outcomes within the current and ongoing climate crisis, one that has seen marginalized communities fearing the worst, while also highlighting potential solutions that could bring about global justice. Specifically, the panel will explore questions pertaining to the key challenges and opportunities around efforts to connect climate change actions to global justice concerns. And to explore these questions with me today, I am joined by two esteemed panelists, Professor Harriet Bulkley and Professor Chukwuemeka Okereke, both of whom are subject experts on issues related to climate change, sustainability, climate governance, and justice. So to start off, I'm going to give a brief introduction to our two panelists, and I will then pose an opening question, which they will both provide brief responses to before getting into our Q&A moderated session. Professor Bulkley undertook her PhD at the University of Cambridge in the UK and holds joint appointments as professor in the Department of Geography at Durham University in the United Kingdom and at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Our research focuses on environmental governance and the politics of climate change, energy, nature, and sustainable cities, and has been included in the highly cited researchers list of the top 1% of researchers internationally 4 times since 2016. Professor Bulkley coordinated the H2020 Nature Vision project from 2016 to 2021, examining the role of urban innovation with nature-based solutions for sustainable development. She has undertaken commissioned research for the UK government, the European Commission, UN Habitat, the OECD, the World Bank, and numerous NGOs. In 2014, Harriet was awarded the King Carl XVI Gustafs Professorship in Environmental Science and a visiting professorship at Lund University in Sweden. And in 2018 was granted the Back Award by the Royal Geographical Society in recognition of the policy impact of our work on climate change. And in 2019, she was elected as a fellow of the Academy of the Social Sciences and as a fellow of the British Academy. Professor Chukwuemeka Okereke is the director of the Center for Climate Change and Development at the Alex Ekwueme Federal University in Ndufu Alike, located in Nigeria, and a visiting professor at the Universities of Reading and Oxford in the UK. He's also a globally recognized leading scholar on global climate governance and international development, with expertise in climate justice, national green growth transition in Africa, climate adaptation, and business climate strategies. Professor Okereke was previously the co-director of the Center for Climate and Justice at the Reading University. He was also director of the Center for Climate Change and Development at the Smith School of Enterprise and Environment at the University of Oxford. He is the coordinating lead author of the UN's IPCC Sixth Assessment Report. and he has served as lead author on other major global scientific assessment projects, including the IPCC Special Report on 1.5-degree global warming and the fifth assessment report of the IPCC. He has also served as lead author for the United Nations Environment Program's Urbanization, Biodiversity, and Ecosystem Services Assessment. So colleagues, welcome. I'm so glad you could join me today in discussing this very important topic. So let me start off by asking you this opening question. In your opinion, why should climate change be considered a justice issue?
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for having us today and for that really nice and kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, isn't it? It's a big question to answer in a couple of minutes. I almost, I'm a social scientist, I'm a geographer. I'd like to ask the other question, why should it not be considered a justice issue? But maybe we'll leave that for now. But I think, really fundamentally, the issue is that those who cause the most harm are not going to be those who experience the most harm, right? And at that very fundamental level, that means that it's a justice issue. But I think, we focus a lot then on the distributions of risks and rights and responsibilities, and so we should. But at the same time, it's almost a sort of level deeper of a justice issue than that, because it's about the capacities that communities, that individuals, that societies of different scales, whether they're countries or regions or cities, it's their capacities to address those uneven geographies of the risks and benefits of climate change. And those capacities are shaped historically by unequal political, economic, and social relations, right? So they're not something that's just come about with climate change. Climate change happens on an already uneven landscape. And fundamentally, those uneven landscapes shape what it is that we can do about climate change. And just one final thing that I suppose, I mean, all of that does keep me up at night sometimes, but I also, with work, growing number of colleagues are doing globally has shown me something that I've learned in the last few years, is that we really also have to be aware of the ways in which responding to climate change can also lead to injustices for some. So we might feel like we're doing the right thing by responding to climate change, but that might lead us, if we don't put justice central, it might lead us to have unjust outcomes while we're doing it.
Thanks so much for that, Harriet. I'm going to pass over to Chuck.
First of all, Kevin, thank you for that introduction. And for me, it's really an honor and pleasure to be in the same space with distinguished Professor Harriet Buckley talking on about this issue. I'm going to frame my answer in terms of what I call 3 asymmetries. Okay, basically repeating a lot of what Harriet already said. But the interconnection between climate and justice reside, in my view, in 3 asymmetries. Number 1 is asymmetry in contribution or responsibility. So there is unequal or unevenness in terms of the contribution that wealthy people versus poor people, wealthy countries versus poor countries make to climate change, okay? And the second asymmetry is asymmetry in impact. So poor people in all manner of geographies, whether in rich or poor countries, tend to suffer disproportionately from the impact of climate change, okay? In the US, for example, you see that it's the people of color, okay, that will most likely bear the greatest brunt of climate change. Migrants, for example, have been reported to die more from heat stress than rich people, okay? When flooding occurs, it will be those who are, marginalized people, vulnerable people that are more likely to be impacted by that. The same applies if you're looking at it from an international perspective. You see again that is usually the poor countries that will suffer disproportionately from the impact of climate change. You see, Netherlands and Bangladesh have broadly similar geography, and yet Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world, and that is because of poverty-related issues. The third asymmetry, which actually Harriet also highlighted, is what we call asymmetry in the voice, ability to decide, which is again that when it comes to thinking about or working out solutions to climate change, everybody don't have the same amount of voice. And it so happens that it is those who have contributed the least to climate change and who suffer the greatest from the impact of climate change that often have the least voice. They're not able to be represented in or around the table where decisions about potential solutions are agreed. Again, this applies at the national level, at the international level, and at the global level. And there's another big point that Harriet made, which I think bears emphasis, which is that these three-dimensional asymmetries that I've indicated actually works quite closely and are intertwined with broader political, socioeconomic dimensions of injustice. So what you have is a cocktail of injustice that characterizes climate governance regimes. And so the question really, as Harriet indicated, is not why should justice be part of it? Why shouldn't justice be central to the question of climate governance? Thank you.
Oh, thank you both. Those are great comments, very thoughtful and very insightful. I guess for me, so I like the framing, Chuck, in terms of thinking about asymmetries, in terms of capacity, vulnerability. And so I'm thinking of the idea of common but differential responsibility, right? And I think this ties in perfectly into the next question, which is, if the first one was a big question, then this is also another big question for the both of you. And maybe you could go this time, Chuck. And the question is, then given the cocktail of problems that we have, as you rightfully pointed out, and given the kind of complexity with this, what have been the main challenges then in connecting climate change policies and actions with global justice concerns?
Oh, one word: power. You see, it so happens, as Harriet and myself have tried to indicate in a response to your first question, that those who have historically contributed to climate change and continue to benefit disproportionately from climate pollution continues to be the people that are, in positions of power. And it is not in the interest of these actors to bring questions of justice to the center of discussions about climate governance. And although, if you go back to 1992, when the international climate regime was negotiated, although questions of justice, in my view, were actually at the front burner and pose serious challenges to what kind of regime will be agreed. You see, there has been a systematic attempt to erode and marginalize justice concerns because, as I said, those that are supposed to be speaking for justice are often not around the table. So this is the biggest issue. And in my view, that applies to even when you're talking about climate justice in national context. For example, in the United States, I am aware that the President Joe Biden has made climate justice a key part of his his mandate in terms of tackling climate change. But even if you go back to the root of climate justice, it's always from the disproportional citation of wisdom in Black communities and other people of color. Why? Because of the absence or inability or the challenges that poor people have to be able to amplify and represent themselves. So power, in my view, is the biggest limitation for justice. And also, I think that there's something that I noticed, especially in the IPCC and intellectual circles, where people just don't connect with certain questions because they don't feel it. It's not their life or lived experience. So I often used to think that it's just that people are kind of deliberately ignoring what I think, it's my lived experience that I feel on a daily basis. But I've come to realize that there are people who are genuinely concerned about climate change, but I find a struggle to connect with the justice dimension because this is not their lived experience. So I was actually pushing that we should have COP in Nigeria or IPCC so that I can take people around and show them and shock them and give some kind of emotional shock, because sometimes intellectual discussions don't quite catch on to people. So these are the two key blockades that I see.
Okay, thank you so much, Chuck. Harriet, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Chuck, that was really interesting. I think it's going to be Sharm el Sheikh, isn't it, that the next COP's going to go to, which I don't think is going to help with your cause, which would be terrible. But yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, power certainly, and Chuck's put all of that so well. But I think and the framing, the experience, the way the issue of climate change has been thought about is also really important. And the lived experience side is something that I hadn't thought about before. That was fascinating. But I think we can see over the last 3 decades or so that climate change has been really framed as a primarily technical issue, right? It's been framed first and foremost about science. And then when everybody got sort of tired and that room was a bit boring, right? Then it became framed as one about basically economic optimism. So it became, during the 2000s, we started to kind of feel that, can you do this? Yes, you can kind of rhetoric that, we can address climate change. We have the solutions, and we often, here we have the solutions to the climate problem. And there's a huge amount of focus on technical innovation as a means through which to address climate change, right? And there's loads of hype at the moment about hydrogen or whether it's nature-based solutions. But, and those, sure, we need to have those conversations, but framed only as technical solutions. They're framed in this kind of optimistic side that we can all get everything that we want. So that we don't have to talk about the justice side of things, because if everything is going to be much, much better in the future, then justice isn't really a problem. So I think that sort of optimistic technical framing, in some sense, has been critical to the politics of climate change, because it has brought on board a whole set of actors who, when you just said everything is really, really bad and it's terrible and there's a problem here and we need to deal with it, they didn't want to listen. So there's a balance to be made between having a kind of, yes, the solutions are there, and also providing obviously hope to people that they can do something about it. But I think sometimes it goes so far into this sort of technical, optimistic language and approach that the questions of justice, even that those technological solutions raise, just gets missed, right?
Right. And those are very important thoughts, so I guess, to even think about and mull over a bit. I was just listening to the two of you. I'm also very much cognizant of the urgency that the current climate crisis presents. And just reading the summary for policymakers for Working Group 1 report for the AR6, it seems as if we are running out of time. And it seems as if the urgency to solve the problem is somehow pushing us more and more to kind of think about coming up with technological solutions that, as you rightfully pointed out, Harriet, could be overlooking some of the kind of underlying structural issues that could make the experiences of vulnerable communities worse over time. So I guess for me then, the question I have for the both of you is, having noted and done you've done a great job in terms of explaining to us the challenges. What are the solutions? How might we work together as a global community more effectively to address the current climate emergency without deepening underlying inequalities? Another big question, I guess.
Yeah, well, I can I'll take a first stab at it. And I mean, there are only big questions here, right? And that's what we have to face. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm interested by this idea that technological solutions often get portrayed as being something that, allow us to deal with things urgently and allow us to deal with things fast. But actually, further from the truth, really. I mean, I hear that the UK government is likely to propose a new nuclear power station as part of its approach to the COP26 meeting and its low carbon strategy. I mean, building a nuclear power station isn't really a quick thing to do, right? I mean, it does take a few decades to get it online. Whereas, you know, insulating homes across the UK, across Europe and elsewhere where people are living in poverty and in cold houses, to reduce their fuel bills and reduce the amount of energy that we're wasting just going straight through people's walls and roofs, would be a lot quicker. It's more complicated and it's not big and shiny and you can't sort of cut a ribbon and sign it off, right? It's kind of difficult and quite boring. But you know, there's lots of those sort of small mundane ways in which we can take a step towards justice every day. And I think for me, that's the thing. I mean, we have to make the political claims about justice, but we have to act with sort of the practical action, the kind of practicality, the mentality that, you know, every day helping, you know, communities and individuals out of poverty and addressing climate change matters to them. You know, every single moment, every single part of their budget we can save. You know, we can start doing that right away. We don't have to kind of wait for the big shiny technologies and the new announcements. But yeah, that's my kind of, yeah. So I mean, I'm a big believer in what cities can do here, because I do think city level politics is often very practical. They often have a very, you know, there's a very kind of visceral feeling to the city when it's not working. There's lots of political complaints and contestation, and it's a place where you can struggle over justice and get good outcomes.
Thank you so much. The practicality is central, right? Thinking about not just the big technological fixes, but fixes that might be small scale, but might actually be far more effective. Thank you so much for that. Chuck, do you want to jump in?
I very much like Harriet's approach and emphasis on practicality. And in some of her work, she also has spoken or written eloquently about experimentation. But I like to move from practicality to ideas and ideation. I think we are facing, as you rightly indicated, a big challenge. So we need big ideas. And globally, we need to embrace the idea of global citizenship. Mm. We need to embrace the idea of global solidarity. We need to embrace the idea of global justice. You know, we live in a world that has become increasingly fragmented, where multilateralism has been, you know, severely challenged. And of course, I have to say here that your country, the United States, has contributed to this fragmentation and the challenge that multilateralism has faced in the past 6 years or so. What we need to emphasize, and I think that the case of, you know, we have in Afghanistan demonstrated that we have to work with greater amount of respect for all countries, different cultures, different approaches to doing things. We have to recognize, as you said in your second question, the idea of commonality but differentiation. We need to empower trust as a critical ingredient in international cooperation. Now, with these kind of intangible, but in my view, very useful and powerful assets in place, the idea then, we now will create a space to begin to work effectively together to solve this problem. We need to understand that no one is safe until everybody is safe. You know, if Harriet and I was, I think earlier this year in a different panel, when somebody was saying that this is purely technological innovation problem, you get a solution and it trickles down. And this kind of, and actually in that forum, somebody was arguing that we shouldn't see climate change as a collective action problem. It is something, it's national, and people can do whatever they like, you know, invest in technology and hope that it trickles down. This sort of framing, whilst it might encourage some technological innovation at home and where you guys are capable, it dampens the spirit of solidarity and trust, which I think is necessary to put together to tackle this problem. So how might we work together? I've already told you about the importance of big ideas. I also see transnational alliances taking root. Harriet has written eloquently about these things. I see the need for greater solidarity among non-nation state actors, because sometimes these are areas where you can, people can speak in one accord and then join forces to push governments both in the north and in the south to act less on the basis of profit maximization, but more on the basis of human dignity and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And I think the question then, because earlier, Chuck, you mentioned that sometimes academic debates and discourses can carry us so far. But I'm still wondering, especially for the community of folks listening in on this session, who might be geoscientists, budding social scientists, physical geographers, what are your thoughts on the role that science can play in guiding and fostering climate change policies and actions that benefits everyone? What role can geography in particular, and geographic science or geographic research play in moving towards a more kind of just world?
So a crucial role, in my view. You remember I spoke a little bit about the lived experience. We need to accept that science is not value-free. I mean, there's a lot you can do to try and become objective, but fundamentally, science is not value-free. The way, even the question you frame, the way you frame your question, the question you think is important, and how you frame it, how you go about researching it, you carry a little bit of your value into it. I mean, we used to think in the IPCC cycle that is all about objective science and review, but increasingly work has been done to show that this is absolutely not the case. There is a need for us to be cognizant of this as we frame our research. There are many questions that still are unanswered. I mean, there is a rush to net zero world now by 2050. Fantastic idea. But when you hear people, they translate this net zero target, which was valorized a bit by IPCC 1.5 report, of which I was a lead author, to the idea that now all communities, all cities, all nations have to go to net zero by 2050. And that does injustice to other parts of the same report, which says that consideration of justice and equity is central to ensure that those who are disproportionately affected by climate change are protected. And that, as Harriet was saying, I hope, but when you are talking about net zero world, in a way that kind of abstracts from the fact that certain historical pollutions have constrained the carbon space within which this net zero development have to occur, then you do a lot of injustice to the people who are struggling to find food on the table. I am releasing an op-ed maybe tomorrow, so that's calls not only for net zero carbon, but also net zero hunger and net zero poverty, because these three have to go together. And I'm tying my argument to the sort of panic I have seen in the UK as a result of increase in gas prices and gas scarcity, where people suddenly that supported climate action suddenly are beginning to think, oh, wow, hang on, maybe it's not as important where the fuel is coming from as having my home heated. But this is the kind of thing that we have been talking about for many, many years. And this seems kind of underappreciated, or it flies over some of my friends' head, because again, they've not been part of, this is not their everyday experience. So geography needs to understand that, people don't feel this thing the same way and begin to frame questions that reflect the wider variety or diversity of lived experience of people in tackling climate change.
Mm.
Thanks so much, Chuck. And Harriet, this should be close to your heart as a trained geographer as
well. Absolutely. I'm fully signed up to trained geographer. at the moment, and hoping that my daughters also want to do geography as well, although I try not to hope that too much, because that obviously will put them off. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that has always appealed to me about geography is its interdisciplinary nature, or I rather like to think of it as a rather undisciplined discipline. I mean, we don't really know where the edges are of geography, right? We're quite happy to kind of bring everybody who wants to be part of a conversation together. And that's what we need here. We need, as Chuck said, we need to be aware that our own lived experience is not that of the majority world in which we're trying to engage and where we're trying to make a difference. We have to be making space for those other voices. We need to take account of other people's knowledge. We need to engage with it on more equal grounds than we have done in the past, right? So we have to make space within our discipline for a kind of Chuck said this before right at the beginning, that there's an asymmetry in the voice that people have to bring forward. And geography as an interdisciplinary subject, which has been used to hearing perspectives across science, social science, engineering, biological sciences, from conservation biologists through to people who are actually living with these challenging times on the ground. We're really well placed to make a space for multiple voices. We really are. And I think we also then need to always recognize the limits of our own knowledge in this regard. I mean, social science is also not going to have all of the answers to climate change, much as sometimes I wish it would do. We need to be, we need to know where our own position is coming from, understand its limits, and make space for voices of others and those conversations. And I think geographers can do that. I'm convinced of it. So,
thank you both so much. I think we're heading to the end of our session, and I want to give you both the space to share a thought or share a key message with the audience. If they were to, the one thing or two things you'd want them to think about, as we end this session, what would those be? What would be your key message to our audience? And I don't know, Harriet, if you want to.
Sure, I can go. Yeah, I can go first. I'll leave Chuck to the last word because he's been doing so much of this great work with the IPCC on it, and can't wait to read the op-ed and indeed the next edition of the IPCC report. But I think what I would leave people with, knowing that climate justice is about the distribution. It is about who's bearing the costs and who's been getting the benefits. We can't fix that distribution without also looking at these underlying inequalities as well. And climate change can't be all of the answer. We can't find all of the answers in the responses that we give to climate change to those underlying inequalities, but we can find some of them. And that means we have to.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly same here. Climate change offers us, a lot of challenges, but also some opportunities to tackle not just the environmental challenges implicated in climate change, but also the fundamental political, economic, social injustice, which will be exacerbated if we don't take a justice approach. And remember what Goro Haram Brundtland said, I think in 1987, that it is futile to think that we can achieve global sustainable development without tackling the underlying issues of inequality and global poverty.
Thank you both for those very thoughtful and insightful comments. I'm sure the audience is going to benefit immensely from the thoughts and ideas you've both shared. So thank you to both Chuck and Harriet. Thanks again to the organizers for the conference, Geography 2050. I think that's the kind of headline for this year's AGS conference. So thanks to the conference organizers and to the technical team for making today's session possible. It was an absolute pleasure serving as moderator, and I'm extremely humbled to be in conversation with Chuck and Harriet. And wishing everybody a great day wherever you are listening to this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for excellent moderation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chuck, for a great conversation.
Great. Cheers. Cheers.
Yes. Bye now.
Bye.